Hello, my name is Dana Lynn, and this is our stress portion, our stress education night of our superfood support call. Tuesday nights, we've been getting together every week to support you in your efforts to transform and reset your health, reset your nutritional patterns. And tonight, I would love to just jump right in to a little bit about why we chose stress as an educational piece to this lifestyle support. I don't think any of us really understand the huge impact that stress has on our health. And a little bit about me. I, from as long back as I can remember, have really been very embodied. I love to move, be in my body. I was very active in sports teams, and went to school as an exercise physiologist and chose a very clinical track. I really thought that I wanted to be in medicine. And I wanted to be in the side of medicine that was like help before we need the medicine. And so as far back as I can remember, I thought that the key to being healthy was to prevent the sickness to begin with. And so I kind of traveled my way through healthcare, trying to change it from the inside. And what I realized that by the time people reach the hospital or reach a doctor, it's actually way too late. Or not too late, but things have progressed to such a degree that it takes a long time to then turn the boat around. And so part of why I got into health coaching and these kinds of talks and sharing what my unique view on health is to hopefully begin to move the needle on learning how to recognize how the body is talking to us before it has to scream at us. And stress is really, um, when I kind of define stress, I'd like to start with it really begins with how we choose to see the world. Our thought patterns, our belief systems, our tendency toward fear, what brings up fear in us, worry in us, guilt, shame, anger. These kinds of emotions are really what begin to create the stress. So there's, of course, stress when it comes to things happening that we then need to pivot. There's some of us have been on this river trip where I first really understood at a deeper level what it would feel like to be water and to begin to move around blocks and create these sensations in my life where I was just flowing. I was really had this surrendered sense of flowing. And so I'm not saying that life is without stress, natural stress. In fact, sometimes even talking to someone that you're afraid to talk to, but you really want to talk to, that kind of stress that produces a good result is still stress. But it really starts with how you're perceiving it, how you're looking at it, how you're viewing it. And so when it comes to the physical reaction to things, then there is this sense of the unfolding of a cascade of physiological events. But that cascade cannot happen until there's an impulse, until there's a thought, until there's a firing of the endocrine system initially. And So if you think about many, our, say, hunter-gatherer kind of existence where we were surrounded by nature all the time, then we had maybe a threat, maybe an animal, maybe something that was happening in our world that created a reaction, and then we backed up and were able to respond and relax. In today's world, we have a tendency to have the thoughts, have the beliefs. They're unconscious to us, but we keep having them in reaction. We keep having them, and so our stress can be very chronic. And so over time, it's not just this fight, flight, freeze kind of reaction, but it's a constant flight or fight. And even some of us have been in settings where we had to be on guard all the time. And so our nervous system is then protecting us all the time. And so we can feel that we need to protect whether the threat is there or not. So even if the threat is removed, we may still feel like we need to protect ourselves. So the first way that I want to talk about how stress is affecting our health is at the level of the thought, the belief, and then the endocrine system, the pituitary gland, and the adrenals then begin to fire hormones out in order to create the scenario that would allow the nervous system to then get energy to protect itself, to restrict, to contract, to run fast, to have a lot of energy. So the way that it does that, it sends hormones into the bloodstream in the form of adrenaline, cortisol, and typically what these hormones are designed to do is to shut things down that are extraneous so that there can be extra energy to do what we need to do. So that kind of effect will then create a scenario in the body that we prefer, or we live in this sympathetic nervous system, this nervous system that's ready to act and ready to jump and ready to respond. Some of us, if you've ever been emotionally triggered by something, this is really what happens. We sort of lose our thought process, and it's an automatic response. And when that happens, the body then closes down this other side of us, the parasympathetic side of us, that's designed to repair, to restore, to digest, to rest. And so that's closing down so that the sympathetic nervous system has a lot of energy and can react quickly. And so when that response happens, then the immune system kind of down regulates as well. So we're closing down, like if you think about flying a plane and how they turn everything up and on in order to take off, and then you can kind of sense things are sort of closing down, and then we're just heading out and flying at an efficient rate. Well, the body does that same thing. So it's closing things down to help in this reaction space. And then the immune system is one of those things that downregulates. So when the immune system downregulates, then we become more susceptible to parasites, viruses, pathogens, because the immune system has downregulated, and the adrenaline and the cortisol is actually asking the liver to release glycogen, And in that process, then there's extra glycogen, extra glucose into the bloodstream. And so when the immune system downregulates, there's extra glucose in the system to feed that need to respond. Then those are actually going to feed the parasites, the pathogens, the viruses. And it creates this oxidative stress at the cellular level that then begins to increase inflammation, chronic inflammation, and has this cascading effect. So how many, maybe raise your hand, but how many of you know when you can suddenly experience that you've been in a state that is where your nervous system feels dysregulated. You feel active, you feel busy, you're responding to things, yeah. And so when that's exactly right, that's exactly what's happening. That's your fight, that's your flight state. And you can feel that your sympathetic nervous system is on fire. And your parasympathetic nervous system has a really hard time overtaking that and allowing the body to rest and repair, digest, relax. So, okay, so this is part of what happens. Now, in this adrenaline release, the cortisol has, been released. There's there's this emotional response. Then, if that isn't allowed to then so there's this activated state. If then that isn't allowed to come back down and reduced to this baseline space, then we become used to this level of activity, and then we operate at this activated state. And so at this activated state, there's the adrenals keep firing adrenaline. They become dysregulated and fatigued and weak. And then this cortisol is constantly being released, which asks the liver to then work harder to release glycogen in the form of glucose. And so there's extra glucose in the system. The pancreas then has to work harder. And so this state of elevated stress is taxing nearly every organ in the body. And so there's this extra level of, I think it creates this acidic, there's extra firing of things. This is part of what creates this acidic state. And then the relaxation is what starts to activate the alkalinizing, re-regulating space inside the cell at the cellular level, and therefore in the bloodstream. So there are so another piece that happens is in this extra state, then we're also releasing extra minerals and vitamins, and they're being pulled out of the system because everything is just it's overactive. And so then we begin to the body then is releasing and using, and minerals are leaving the system at a higher rate, vitamins, minerals. And so it requires extra so then when we're able to slow down, activate the parasympathetic state, then we can begin to rest and repair. But it may not feel very comfortable for us if we're at this state of that becomes our norm, this elevated state of stress. Then when we start to rest and relax, then that becomes very uncomfortable. So a couple of ways, what I wanted to share about how to then begin to make this state of parasympathetic activation a bit more normal, a bit more comfortable, then their movement, like in the form of exercise, is one way to begin to create stress that then can help the system re-regulate and activate the parasympathetic relaxation tendency. So movement, deep breathing, deep breath work exercises also has that, but it's also chemically, it releases this CO2 and rebalances the bloodstream. Movement does that because we're also breathing, we're also using energy to rebalance the bloodstream, rebalance the hormones in the bloodstream, using up some of this cortisol, the adrenaline process to rebalance. Then, so breathing, movement, then eating a balanced diet. So nutrition, when we are choosing things that nourish us deeply, then rather than noticing how when we're activated in a stress state, then we tend to reach for things that soothe us or are quick and easy, and that tends to further the stress response. But when we're able to slow down and choose nutritious meals, then that can help at the cellular level rebalance the system as well. But my favorite is to be in nature, because spending time in nature and allowing your system to rebalance with the energies of the natural world further supports the parasympathetic system in resting, re-regulating, repairing, digesting at that deeper level. And most of us tend to just pass through, but when I say spend time in nature, I really mean to submerge yourself, to do everything you can to leave the electronic world and allow the energies of nature to fully surround you and feel your essence of being that. So you are not separate from nature, but of nature itself. That, I think, has the greatest effect on our ability to regulate stress outside of in the natural world, in our world otherwise. So when it comes to then the physiological effects, then those four things I think are good ways of what to do about it. And so I will be happy to pause, and looks like we have a question. So Suzanne.
That's interesting that you mentioned those four things. I think I've heard of them before. And I just read something yesterday, and I listened to this video of this gentleman, probably in his late 50s or early 60s, who had a very, very significant stage 4 cancer diagnosis. It came on suddenly. He had no idea, and he did not want to get chemotherapy or radiation. So he did some research, and he found out that if you spend time in a like a wild forest and in an area, not necessarily just only in the forest, but meadows with rocks and all different kinds of plants, that they actually release a kind of chemical. It's, and I'm trying to remember the name, I think some kind of peptides, that if you spend enough time in nature, your body absorbs that chemical, which then like gets rid of all the inflammation and the toxins. It occurs naturally. Like this is what the trees and the plants are giving off, and your body takes that in. And so you can, it's not just that you emotionally feel better, physically you get better. And this guy did that for 8 months. Every week he would go and immerse himself in nature for like a day or part of a day. And when he went back in 8 months to see, what was going on, he had no cancer.
Hmm.
And that's all he did. That's the only change that he did. So there's actually a physical thing that happens that allow our bodies to take in this substance that's being released by the trees and the forest, that allows our cells to heal.
Hmm.
So yeah, it's very fascinating that you mentioned that.
Hmm. Hmm. The other piece that I wanted to thank you for sharing that, Suzanne. I totally believe it. Um, there's so from grounding to feeling the essence of the trees, all of that I think has very valuable, not only valuable, but I think in this day and age it's going to become essential for us to spend that kind of time in nature because we're being drawn away from nature in so many other places. But another piece that I really wanted to make sure I presenced here is that when we're in nature, we start to think differently. That my original, the beginning of this talk was really about our belief systems, our thought processes, what we're worrying about, what we're focusing about, what we're obsessing about, that's actually creating the stress more than anything else. And so when we're in nature and we begin to feel that the trees don't do that, that we can begin to settle into who we are in our original nature, like in a rewilding sense, that is part of what takes away our stress. But the other piece is that when our makeup, our gut, so our microbiome isn't just in our gut. No, it's all of these organisms that we walk around with, and they are they have a say in in how they're affecting us. And when we begin to change the terrain that they have to live in by changing our vibration with our thoughts, then our thoughts and our most of them are centralized in our gut. And so the connection between what we're thinking and the quality of our digestion has plays a very important role in each other, which then affects our stress. And so when we can change the makeup of our microbiome, our terrain, our physical, the essence of what we're carrying around, then we start to think differently. We start to open, perhaps we worry less, perhaps we're less filled with anxiety or anxious thoughts or worry. And so when one changes, the other changes. And so spending time in nature, re regulating, changing how we're eating and what we're eating, when we're eating it, our relationship to the sun, all of those things play a role in our vibration, how we're able to emote, what we're hanging on to. Um, how safe is it to let go of those emotions and surrender? All of these things are playing a role in our stress level and therefore our chronic state inside the terrain of our body. And so that's part of why what brings us together are these superfoods. And that's part of what I think helps to shift our reality when we start to be supported by this dense nutrition. And it starts to change our terrain, starts to change how we think, which has a cascade effect on our entire nervous system, our entire um, way that we relate to the world. So that just happy to open it up to any other comments, any other thoughts. Um, I was wondering, Rajni, if you would share. So part of yeah, share your story, a little bit of your experience over the past maybe year and a half.
Yeah, I started taking the superfoods fall of 2022. And I mean, at that time, I was in New York taking care of my mom, who was very ill and, going downhill. So being away from home and living with my mom was a pretty stressful environment, not to mention like being in close quarters, like all those childhood issues and dealing with that. Um, and that's when I started taking the superfoods, and it was just really helpful to have that the nutrition. I could feel immediately the sense of like grounding support and energy that I felt to deal with that situation. And then, then after she passed away, I came back to South Dakota, and had some other major life transitions. And I don't know if you guys, I don't remember what that scale is. There's this scale that talks about, the major stressors in life, the major things that people can go through, like death, get divorced, moving. Well, I've done all three of those things in the past year and a half. And so as soon as I got back to South Dakota, so my marriage went downhill and we eventually divorced, and then I just recently moved. So I'll have to say that it's been pretty amazing how resilient I've been able to be in those kind of situations. I mean, I've had very traumatic experiences in the past, with death in my family, and being in an abusive relationship, and lots of different things where my reaction, my response to those events were definitely not, I couldn't handle them as well, whereas now having this like baseline nutrition that feeds my whole system, where I feel really stable and able to really think more clearly. I think it's like more that parasympathetic ability to think things through and realize, everything's not going to be perfect and it's not going to be easy, and I just need to trust and go with the flow. And having that experience and having those superfoods stabilizing my systems really has allowed me to navigate these major life transitions with so much more ease.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing. Glad for you. Yeah.
I'd like to add that I just met Rajni this past summer and fall. And before I actually met her in person, we had quite a number of phone conversations. And even as I, met her and got to know her, I never, ever would have in a thousand years thought she had been through even one traumatic event or life changing event, because she was so grounded and calm, not just like calm all the time, but even in the midst of being busy, she was just very grounded and steady. And then when I heard all of these things, I'm like, what? Yeah. So you could have fooled me.
Beautiful. Great. Well, I'm going to stop the recording and uh, we can continue to chat here. If you are catching this on a replay, then and are interested in learning a bit more about this 90-day protocol, this health reset that we are now in the middle of, I guess we're nearing the end. We will be then really transitioning to the holidays and staying healthy through the holidays from this point on. They are right around the corner. So if you're catching this on the replay, then welcome to the community. Welcome to Healthy Through the Holidays. Yeah.